We are in a room filled with marketers today who see Google as a really important marketing platform. But the tables are turned today. You are here as the marketer, and as a Cannes Lion winner as Marketer of the Year, you must feel a lot of pressure to show some brilliance today.
Yeah.
So,
and I think, how many of you from like agencies in the room? And then client side? Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we're gonna, there is a lot of pressure, and I think it's gonna be a bit more of an informal session, but also feel really kind of humbled. We're gonna quickly find the limits of my knowledge in terms of marketing. That Cannes Lion had a lot to do with a lot of other people, not so much me, but we'll try our best.
well, can you tell us a little bit about the marketing journey you've been on, and what exactly are you marketing? Are you marketing hardware? Is it ads? Is it smart homes?
Yeah, so, okay, so real quick, and then kind of some ground rules for today. So we did a fireside chat because I wanted to be able to touch on a lot of different topics and open the doors in a few different areas. But my team's convinced that it's going to be boring and that no fireside chat has ever worked in the history of any presentation and any event. So rules for the day: cough if you think I'm being boring and I need a little bit more energy, and then as I kind of hear that, folks who are sick in the room, then please leave so that I don't get confused. But so here's to your question. So I did bring a couple slides just so that like a little bit of background. We kind of mentioned like the kind of early days of Google marketing. Google marketing really did start as just the team that did videos and blog posts for engineers that just wanted to get their products out in the world. And we have a tool internally. You can just go in an internal link and go/%, and you can figure out where, not in terms of actual seniority, but at least in terms of tenure, how long you've been at the company relative to the rest of the marketing department. And this is actually just a snapshot at the growth of marketing headcount over the years, and it tells you everything about kind of how we've shifted as a company. And so often when I say, okay, I'm a marketer at Google, a lot of folks don't really know what that means. Like they might have some sense of, okay, so are you marketing search? Well, in some markets, yes, absolutely, we're doing that. But it's really a reflection of how we've changed as an organization, where as we have expanded the product portfolio, marketing has become a core function within Google. So for us, that's new subscription services like Google Play, and then the YouTube ecosystem. It might be hardware, whether that's a Pixel Buds, Pixelbook. We like the Pixel thing. It just makes it easier for naming products, but also the full like Android ecosystem. But it might be YouTube events and so on. So like our day-to-day is everything from things like this. So some of you might work in content marketing and CRM. So we've got Think with Google, and that's the B2B kind of lead horse for us. And then we might also flip to, okay, here's a 15,000 person concert for YouTube and doing something more experiential and tying it to a launch there. And then, of course, we have lots of software. I think we have anywhere like 38, 40 campaigns at any given time for apps across Google. And so this is one that we built for marketers called Primer, these little 5-minute lessons on marketing. We might do brand and reputation. So in Canada, for example, we invest to teach kids to code, trying to get more women into technology, making investments in digital skills, helping startups, and it gets exemplified through stuff like this. And then, of course, like I think what we're going to focus on a lot today is some of the more kind of brand building side, which if you've experienced our marketing in Canada, this is the lion's share of what you've seen is marketing products like these, much in a similar way that you would see kind of CPGs and retailers and other tech companies kind of going about that. So I look at it as like, so why I say we're going to find the limits to my kind of knowledge today is I'm a specialist in being a generalist. My team is kind of the same. We're pulled in so many different directions. We use pretty much every different type of marketing discipline, and products that are in kind of early stage, trying to seed them for growth. We're number one in some categories for sure. We're a distant number 4, 5, 6. For a long time, we thought we could be, in the social network space, and so we were a long shot there as well. So we sort of pull all these things out of our toolkit. But as a result of that, we create some frameworks around essentially media buying, creative building, and then measurement, and that's what I'm hoping to share.
Okay, so there's clearly a broad range of things that you market. So is there a formula?
Okay, yeah. So we've talked a little bit about this. I don't think that there's a formula at all, and actually, Google's like so decentralized that even some of the stuff that I shared today, it doesn't even extend beyond our team because we don't necessarily mandate all of it. But one thing that we've done that's really unique, I think, is created centers of excellence within the broader organization around media, around creative, around social, are kind of three really great examples. We even have some kind of creative technologists that are kind of other teams as well. But these teams, I was discussing with another marketer earlier this year, so when we build an internal media team, our goal isn't to replace our external agency. It's to augment what they do and make us smarter. And so they're researchers, data scientists, ex-media buyers, and they're trying to analyze as many of our campaigns as possible, put a lot of tests out into the world, and then quickly disseminate that information throughout the entire organization so that we all are kind of learning. And I think one of the nice things about being on that journey, I liken it to how if you think about it from a mobile perspective and think about mobile payments and why it's so much more prevalent in Africa and Asia rather than markets like ours that are more developed, well, those markets didn't have all of the legacy systems and legacy ways of viewing the world. And so they quickly just adapted what the latest and greatest and most efficient technology was. And so I think the two things that come to mind for us is we didn't have legacy ways of doing things. We barely knew how to market. Like I was part of a wave of brand marketers that came into Google when Google was trying to really learn from people like you, okay, what does best-in-class marketing look like? So we didn't have those legacy systems, and I think more than a singular process, rather than trying to turn marketing into a science that you can just kind of like say, hey, here's the one number or the one tool, rather we try to turn it into the scientific method. So everything's about learning and growing and iterating, whether that's a large-scale campaign or like a very small kind of tactical thing that we might be doing.
Got it. You mentioned finding the right audience, and I think marketers generally know how to reach their consumers and where the consumers are spending their time. I think the hardest question is how much do I spend on each of those channels, especially when you don't have data and things like that.
Yeah. So, okay, this is like a bad talk show where it's like, you know, when you were a baby and then like they have the picture already prepared. It's like so. So most of this is like a totally live conversation, but we did prep a few of these. Let me show you how we think about the world. It's like this is me as a baby. Okay. So I thought these are important because I'll show you a couple media investment charts for some of the brand campaigns that we might do. Don't pay attention to the numbers too much because they're largely made up because I didn't really want to get fired today by telling you exactly what we spend where. But one of the things that I fundamentally believe, although we've never really tested it with my team, is that if you show me any media investment chart, I can probably tell you which product of ours it is and what the life stage of that product is, because our philosophy is fairly consistent in how we think about our investment. And so as long as you know where the investment is, you can pretty much like work backwards and have a sense of where the product might be. And so, you know, maybe we won't get too much into consumer insights and how to build the ideal segments and all that kind of stuff today, but at least when it comes down to the stage of marketing investment. So this is an interesting one because so what you see here is, and this would probably be low for us in terms of the percentage of online spend, but you've got a fairly healthy, for a company like ours, percentage on offline. You've got a ton of channels happening, and then let's call out the elephant in the room. It's like, Google, tell us why you're spending so much money on TV. TV obviously works, right? Our philosophy and kind of our the best that we can figure out from all of our testing is that every marketing channel works in the right context and at the right time. So we try to obsess over where is that product at in terms of its life stage, the business challenge that we're trying to solve for, who is the audience, what are their media consumption habits, all of the stuff that like I bet a lot of you folks do. But I think what we try to do is operate with all of the signals that we have and try to maximize and build from that first. And so effectively, we actually top up digital first and then start funding after that. And so the reason in this case that we were probably using TV is that this is likely a product that needed to build really fast awareness for us. So it might be something like, hey, I don't know, we launch a lot of products in the fall, and they might need to sell a lot of units in the fall. And so we don't have as much of a luxury over building a brand over time. And so although TV is high reach, and although YouTube is high reach and reach is largely a commodity, when you start coupling those things together, we can really dramatically accelerate that curve. And so even though every MMM study that I've ever done for us, I'm not saying for the world, this does not extend beyond our walls, doesn't show a great long-term ROI of TV as our lead horse. In those scenarios, I will invest in like that. But then what might happen beyond that is, like, let's say you get to a stage where that product is a little bit more established, we've hit the awareness goals that we might have, and now we're going to dial it back, and we're going to focus more on kind of really taking all of those consumers that are in the funnel and helping them through the journey. And so we might dramatically spend more on direct response and so on. We might still keep a level of TV and online video and other components like that, but you see some of those other channels start to go away. And so it's possible that, so the difference between those two slides, you could think of this as like, this might be year one launch of a product, and this might be year two sustaining that. Or it might be, this is what it looks like when you have that one product a year that we have enough money to actually really truly like spend on every marketing channel and make sure that everyone in the country knows about it. It might look like this. And then you might have a product like, let's say, Google Wi-Fi or something that's more niche. It's sold online. Our volume goals are far lower, and that's where we're trying to focus on really just optimizing that funnel. And so it might look like that. And so we're constantly playing with these things. We don't have a hard rule on how much should be spent in any one given area. I think the thing that is true, though, like if this was year one, and I had a ton of money, and then year two, let's say our CFO, Ruth, says, hey, I'm going to cut your budgets a little bit more. This is probably what it's going to look like, where I'm going to make sure I always defend the stuff that I have the most amount of signals on intent and context and understand that audience and what they want, but, rather than keeping things that are sort of like high awareness building and are a bit more sort of blunt instruments from a marketing perspective.
So this is a very relevant discussion for me because we're going through P1 TV sign off, anyone, and trying to determine how much to spend on TV. So I'm hearing you say we save TV till the end. So when the ROI driving things are fully funded, then and only then do I look at TV.
Yeah, it would be really, really weird for us to be doing anything where like TV was the lead thing that we protect, but we're constantly trying to test that out, right? Like we have, for example, we have subscription products that we've looked at in certain markets where, as you're trying to optimize this balance and saying, can we, like, what is the actual level of market level awareness and maturity of this product, and are there enough users out there that would buy? And if there are, I would actually submit that there's an awful lot of our products that we think we need some of these awareness building things because, like, you need to fill the funnel, you need to fill the funnel. It's like, well, the funnel's already probably just there with enough inherent interest in that product, and you don't have enough money to even capitalize off what's happening off that funnel anyway. So if you just focus on the awareness building, you might be just setting the table to build the category for another retailer or another brand or someone to pick them up through the search journey or research path or something like that. And so, but there are cases, and we have them, we're going through this right now, where we realized we thought the actual market size was pretty big, and then we realized, like, ooh, DR is not going to get us there. We actually need to spend some time building that above the line awareness. And so now we're looking at sort of higher impact digital placements, whether that's YouTube mastheads and site takeovers and so on, out of home and TV, so sort of like get the interest moving a little bit on that product.
Now, where on this continuum do influencers fall?
Yeah. I had a long chat with my PR team about this. They're like, don't be mean. So here's my thing on influencer. I think it can absolutely work for the business. We spend with certain like organic campaigns or partnerships and sort of like influencers all bundled together. I think the struggle right now that I have in terms of looking at briefs that I see is that we're influencer in so many different ways is sort of faith-based marketing, or it's a PR approach that isn't being properly evaluated on PR terms. Like, look, if this is like qualitatively a really good relationship for us to have, and we need to be associated with that person, and we're truly using that relationship because they're going to influence, so we're going deep with one or two people, that's different. That I don't include that into this the next part of this thinking, which is, so when we did the first Pixel launch, for example, we worked a lot with micro influencers, and we're trying to get these like 10,000 follower folks and 20,000 and 30,000, and trying to have on aggregate a bunch of them. And we realized looking back, it's like, well, okay, so effectively, we're not actually building any real relationship with any one of them specifically. So what we're doing is using these influencers as a proxy for what the audience might be that we want to garner. And so wouldn't our other media vehicles be more just as precise in terms of, okay, we're going after this millennial audience? Well, you can find really sophisticated audience tools on Google and Facebook and other platforms, so we can continue to do that. Because the problem is that the math falls apart. So we started realizing that, okay, even though I don't have the data to tell you exactly how well that influencer campaign worked after the outset, I can likely sit there with one of our associate managers who's running it and say, okay, great. So we invested 10 hours of training this person on how our products worked. We gave them 10 free devices. Like, we know what all the input costs are. So then let's just do the math and say, okay, based on what Facebook has done with its algorithm, how many people are actually going to see that organically? And then based on what we know about digital as a whole, how many people do we think are actually going to be moved by this or take action as a result of it? And by the time you start working through, it's like, cool, we're not even paying back the phones that we gave them, or it's like it's way off. And so it doesn't mean that you don't do influencer, because it can work, but where we've started to shift our thinking is when you start doing the sort of backwards math at the front end, you switch to thinking, okay, maybe for this product and based on what we want to do, we need influencers in the range of like 200,000 followers to 400,000 followers, and that's our sweet spot. Because we can't afford Beyonce, but we're also not going to get any value from the person with 20,000 subscribers, followers, whatever it might be.
Now, you guys are YouTube, and you've got these YouTube creators with millions of followers. Don't they want to help you for free because you made them famous?
They used to, and then they got famous. No, so we don't. It's an issue. Like, we don't have any extra access. I think that's actually maybe that's also setting the table for like what is Google marketing. So Google marketing, we have an internal Google sales team that tries to sell to Google marketing to try to get us to spend more on their platform, right? So it's sort of a church and state thing, and so it means that we actually don't I can't, the same way, we might actually if we're working on YouTube, for example, we know who the YouTube partner managers are. So maybe it's easier for us to get that initial phone call with a YouTube creator. But then at the end of the day, their manager, whoever else is looking at it from their business partners is still going to say, okay, cool, YouTube wants me to do this like private concert for a bunch of advertisers in Toronto. That doesn't seem on brand for me. So yeah, it's going to cost you $200,000. Okay, cool. Like, do we get the family discount? Probably not. But if they're doing something where they feel like, you know what, I'm personally attached to that. You're doing this thing, it's more charitable, or we think it's going to be good for my brand, then they might give us a better deal. But that's the same as if Procter & Gamble called them up with a really interesting idea. And this also flips, by the way, to our products. Like, I don't have a back door into some secret trove of data on the back end of Maps or something, and I can use that. We use all the off-the-shelf stuff. So when things become available as betas to our regular customer base, that's when we start getting access to it as well. And so we're often in this position where, and this is that learning curve that I talked about, where we need to just keep up and keep pace with our engineers as much as possible.
So speaking of betas, does Google like to be first? Because I know a lot of marketers, their objective is, I want to be first in this platform, ad product, et cetera. Is that your objective?
In certain areas. Like, if we think that this is a fundamental shift to the way that marketing will be done over the next few years, and we just have to learn it, we will overinvest. So, for example, in 2014, Lorraine Toohill, 2013 maybe, I don't know. Lorraine Toohill, our CMO, the person who is largely responsible for that Cannes Lion and building this organization, she was pretty bullish in saying, you need to move as much money as possible towards programmatic, and we need to become programmatic experts in this organization. And so she was pretty aggressive about the percentage of her spend that she wanted there, and because she saw it as a fundamental shift to how marketing was going to be done. I think in other areas, we're cool to hang back, or we're realizing our own limitations. Like often, marketers, well, likely you're all agencies in the room, so or a lot of you, and so you probably hear from your marketing clients, hey, I want to do this never been done before thing. Like, give me the never been done before. And you're like, well, your never been done before thing is a 6-second bumper ad on YouTube. And that's where we found ourselves in many cases. And so we've been really investing in actually, rather than adding a 9th channel and a 10th channel and an experimental Snapchat campaign and this and that, the other thing is okay, well, if I put a body on really learning how the millions of dollars that we spend on search, if I put an extra body on that to make that 10% more effective, that's way bigger return for us in our campaigns and way easier to go out and get it than to go learn this whole kind of new thing. And so we're always trying to strike that balance. But I think on aggregate, we do try to be first, but we do it across the entire organization, every country being involved. And the way that we filter that, we have these learning agendas where on a product level, campaign level, and company level, we know what we want to learn that quarter. And so that internal media team will distribute a report every quarter. Here's everything we learned. There's a weekly, and then there's another monthly one of here's the little micro learnings. Like one example would be we thought search wasn't really great for a lot of brand building efforts because we thought, okay, great, it fills kind of like the DR need for our campaigns, but we've got these products that need to build awareness. And so we're, of course, going to do YouTube and TV and out of home and all these things. And then just as an experiment with not a lot of money, one of our team members in Europe just ran a test to see, okay, but the really expensive part for us on search is kind of the lower funnel stuff where people are starting to exhibit signs that they're ready to buy a phone. But what if I start buying these more generic terms over here, and I'm not necessarily measuring whether they convert to buy a phone, but I'm measuring what the perception shifts are, measuring what the overall awareness lift is going to be from some of those investments, and found that as a really interesting complement to everything else that we were doing. It's just let's make sure they know the brand name and the product early and often throughout the entire purchase journey. And so that's an example of a little experiment that would be done by one team that would then go out in a weekly report and a quarterly wrap up, that if it's big enough, then it becomes sort of this rule of thumb that, okay, next time when we're working with our media agency, we're going to say, you should allocate a certain percentage of our awareness building efforts to search, and it's going to look like this. Or if it's small enough, we might just see if we get a few more data points that point in the same direction.
So let's say you are really happy with your blogging chart on the bottom of the funnel, with digital, with television, and then someone says, hey, Fab, here's 300 grand. What would you do with that? Would you consider influencers at that point?
We buy plants. We buy this big G, which I don't know how much it cost. Maybe. I still think I go back to, we actually have faced this pretty recently, and we started investing in, we looked back at our YouTube campaigns and said, well, okay, year one of our hardware launches, we just did YouTube. Okay, so we had a certain percentage on YouTube. Cool. And then our audience solutions on YouTube got better. And so we were moving dollars already to some of the advanced audiences product that really encompass not only the sort of the demographic signals, but the intent-based signals as well. So that was making things more successful. But now we've realized that, okay, even if you get the extra $300,000, we haven't really cracked video sequencing yet on YouTube. So, so one of the things that we're working on is, okay, can we dedicate some dollars to campaigns where you're effectively using YouTube as if it was the entire funnel? And so that anthem building really exciting spot that makes you really love a pixel and throw your iPhone out, well, that might be something that you see on a masthead. It's a Google preferred by, all those things. But then you're going to, the sequencing of it will be that you might get remarketed to afterwards with the 6-second spot that just shows you how great the camera is, and the other spot that shows how great the X is, because I'm not allowed talking about future things. But and then using sort of new sort of action products that are available on YouTube to sort of close the deal and do more of a performance marketing approach on YouTube. So that entire thing, I'd rather learn how to do that, because if I learn how to do that, that's going to impact my entire, it might impact $15 million of spend next year if I crack the code on that, than doing, like again, it's not that influencer doesn't work or that out of home doesn't work and so on. We just try to make sure that we're focusing our time on what matters. Our team had a long conversation a few weeks back and where we were obsessing over this out of home stunt that we were talking about, and we realized, oh gosh, like we just spent an entire meeting with all these folks in the room talking about this one thing that when you do the math, like it was 1% of our spend. Like we just got to focus the time on what's actually going to deliver the results.
Okay, so we've talked about how you decide where to spend your advertising dollars. Now let's talk about what you say and how you say it, because getting consumer attention is really, really hard. What do you think is the role of a client versus an agency when it comes to creative?
Well, so this is funny because like I don't have a concept for how you all do it. I really truly don't. I remember what it was like at General Mills, but other than that, I don't really know. And so if General Mills Canada is indicative of any other companies that you might work with, there was a real division of labor between media and creative, and it felt at least, and they've come a long way since, by the way, too. So like this is General Mills a long time ago. So if you're from General Mills, you've learned undoubtedly. But at least back then, there was this separation between media and creative, and there was also this sense that like client writes the brief, hands it off. And we try to work much more fluidly. So I mentioned some of these internal kind of departments where there's departments of excellence, and they're trying to create this sort of learning engine. There are cases where absolutely there's sort of a brief handoff, and it's a more kind of traditional approach, and we wait. On our biggest campaigns, it's really hard to know. Like it would be hard to say, did the agency come up with that idea? Did we come up with that idea? Was it creative or media? Because they're all tied. Like if you are doing, so for example, and this one was out of the US, but we've been doing this a bit more, where we're taking YouTube and saying, can we use YouTube as a really fast reach, cost-effective vehicle for us? And around the Grammys, we built this one campaign where we basically try to buy all of YouTube, at least every single format that we could for this campaign, all of the different ones that I talked about. And I think the result was something like, it was basically like a Super Bowl-sized audience for a third of the price, let's say. But in order to do that, in order to actually make that happen, there can't be that division of labor really between all of the parties involved. You have to build the creative concepts with the kind of end media buying. Like I'm not telling you anything new. We all know that we should be working better together. I'm just saying that I think when we get it right, things truly are kind of that fluid. And so in order to do that, one of the things that we've had to get much better at is creative testing along the way. We didn't test creative at all up until like maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. So this is something where we were really behind the rest of the world. And now we're not only doing testing with research houses in our own kind of testing methodology, but we're starting to obsess a little bit more about testing in real live environments. So we might do, like we did a campaign, like the two examples would be, so on a small scale, we might take a certain percentage of a media buy, like we took 12% of a media buy, like the first 12%, and said, okay, so we can find an audience, like these different audiences on YouTube. And so why don't we take 3%, 3%, 3%, 3%, and see which audience has a bit more affinity to that creative and the creative is working. And so that allows us to figure out which audience. You could also flip it and say which piece of creative works relative to this one audience. And so we're trying to do that in live settings. So that would be like a micro example of how we're working very fluidly with our agency to sort of see. And then another one is like we had this campaign that Taylor on our team and others worked on last year where it was a campaign supporting female creators on YouTube and trying to build up their channels. I would be hard-pressed to say where that campaign actually began and ended, because the first initial tests were trying to see, okay, which categories within our product do better against that audience, let's say. And then you move to GDN testing to figure out, okay, we know these categories do a little bit better what messages might work to actually get them to watch more YouTube on a daily basis, let's say. And so then you built that. Then we went into sort of offline testing with our agencies and did focus groups in Toronto and so on. And so you're building that. And then you worked with our agencies to say, okay, let's test different ad formats across Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and so on. And then after that, then let's go into another revision. This goes on and on and on, but we started in March and then ended up actually only launching in like October, November. And so again, it's very iterative in nature, and you're trying to use a lot of the tools.
Now, you talked about audiences a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room keep hearing about how we want to deliver much more personalized messages that are dynamically changing. Can you talk about Google's approach to that?
So this is another area where it's kind of like the programmatic story all over again, where we are obsessed with automating as much as possible. Because that's our way of augmenting the existing headcount that we have. Like, if I think back to conversations that I might have for the size of budget that we have, if we compare it out to some other organizations, they might have 2-3 times the marketing staff to do that. And we're trying to reach. We have 7 different products that have billions. 1 billion plus users. And so that's a really daunting task to be kind of all things to all people at all times. And so automation is one way that we're trying to get there. So we are trying to overly invest in learning about tools that can help us dynamically create and deliver creative, whether that's something like responsive ads or dynamic search. Most recently, we've been trying to play within apps and YouTube. So apps, if you're not familiar with universal app campaigns, there are competitor products, you should look at them and so on, but that's ours, and that's the one that we kind of know best. So we've moved all of our app campaigns to universal app campaigns, which essentially allows you to build a creative framework, a set of creative assets, copy, text, video, and so on, and then the software will then optimize the various creative assets across different formats, whether that's an ad within other apps or within Google's ad network on GDN, let's say, and so then you're sort of optimizing that best creative. Most recently on YouTube, we started doing things with director mix. So same kind of concept, feed all the different assets, different types of audiences that you might have in mind. And so a perfect example of a product that's really great for this is Google Home, where Home is, like, it's the same for all of us, but your interest in it is different. Like, you might be really into sports and travel, and I might be really into cooking and fashion. And so when that home ad through directory mix gets served to you versus to me, it might be the same brand architecture and creative look and feel, but it's delivered in a way that's more showing you the visuals and the examples that are related to what you like and are interested in relative to me. And the really nice thing about that is, like, when you start automating kind of on those levels, you have better conversations internally and then with your agency. Because the way that those products all work is you need to have the creative assets figured out, but then you also need to tell them, the system, okay, what are we optimizing for? Like, are we optimizing for someone to just download the app? Or are we optimizing for someone to put in a credit card, and that's the thing that we feel like is gold standard in terms of user engagement? Or are they active 14 days later? What is it? And those are the questions that really, I think, are really enlightening and the best in terms of agency-client relationship, because then you get to figure out, like, well, what's the actual business goal? And so you end up having more conversations about that if you can get the automation part right.
So it sounds like, when they say if you have 8 good pieces in your wardrobe, you can create, 79 different outfits, but you don't need to buy the 79 outfits. That's what I'm hearing this allows you to do.
Yeah, that's it. Like, effectively, there's a mixing and matching going on. Yeah. And I guess if you carry the analogy further, it's, or you just need to tell, like, what does looking good at work, like, do you want to look like a guy who doesn't care and can't work outside of his industry, or do you want to look like someone that, like, is more respectable, whatever the business goal would be for that outfit, let's say.
Got it. So speaking of budget, so marketers are challenged with trying to develop the best creative for different platforms that have different requirements: sound off, sound on, long versus short, horizontal versus vertical. And that really gets expensive and complicated. So how do you handle that at Google?
one of the ways that we do it is through automation a little bit, is kind of thinking through multiple formats, although that's more prevalent in text, certainly in images. Video is nascent, and so we're not really fully there. But then we also, again, try to think back to what I was saying earlier, which is like, okay, well, let's make the creative that is against like the most impactful parts of our media buy. That's where we focus on first, and then we focus on other parts. But when we're briefing, we try to make sure that we're getting creative ideas that can really flex. So again, so this is me as a baby. We'll show just, this is the same brief, but it's effectively what we said was like, give me a 60, give me a 15, and then give me a 6. And that's kind of the way that we're briefing a lot these days on video, is that we want to make sure that when we're at creative shoots, without like disrupting the integrity of the creative idea, that this is something that on a single day of shooting or 2 days of shooting or whatever, we can get multiple assets out of it. It works really nicely for our brands that have often like different reasons to believe or features. But maybe, Selena, if you can hear me, maybe just play the 15 and then the 6.
Come on, DeMar. You can make this. You made 1 million of these, but none were bigger than this. Hey, Google, set the cake timer for 45 minutes.
Setting cake timer for 45 minutes.
Coaches are gonna love this. Hey, Google, play DeMar DeRozan highlights on my TV.
Okay, playing on living room TV.
We did not forecast that trade at all. But you can see, so that like that's just one, it's a very simple kind of execution, but that's the way that we think about the world when we're briefing, is like, let's try to milk this in terms of as many assets as possible. And of course, we might end up doing a one-off thing for another format. But the 6-second one is one that's really working very hard for us. And certainly, of course, the 15s, like we don't use 30s as much in terms of our thinking and so on, because like the shorter formats are the ones that play across kind of all ecosystems.
Right, so we've talked about the medium, we've talked about the message. Now let's talk about measurement. So as a marketer, I have so much information. I think I need a dashboard for my dashboard. And I'd love to hear how Google measures value.
Yeah, okay. This is gonna be a long one, okay. But I'm gonna try to do it quickly. I don't know how much time we've got, so we've got like, that's an 8 minutes to I think the 45 minutes, and then we can run a little bit over or do questions or something. But so we've been thinking a lot about measurement in terms of how do we solve for this. Like I think we did a tally and our CMO was getting something like 70 or 80 KPIs laddered up to her on a regular basis, which is insane. Like you can't run a business like that. And at the same time, we need to kind of understand all these different dynamics of what's happening on kind of any given part of the business. Because one of the things that we struggle with, or that I see even within our organization, is that we try to have these business objectives, that's great, and then they get turned into marketing objectives. But then, lo and behold, some metric like CPA in cost per acquisition or something like that becomes the holy grail metric and the thing that we're trying to judge every campaign and media buy and creative against. And that's just a poor way of using that tool, because it doesn't always extend to every example and might make you make poor decisions in certain areas, because lifetime value, I think, is better, and maybe we'll get there in a second. But so then we try to answer this and say, okay, having one metric that we use all the time is silly. But at the same time, how do we tie all of these things together? And so we created a framework, and I'm clicking next, but it's not going. So Selena, wherever you are. Nope. This is the framework. Let me try to explain it really, really quick. So don't worry too much about the specific examples that are kind of in the middle, because the way that you best use this, like each one of my teams, some of them are finding this out for the first time in this audience. You're going to be building this. Some of them have already started and are doing it. But this is an impact matrix. And effectively what we do is we plot out all the KPIs that we care about, and then we try to look at them in kind of two variables. So is this something that is super strategic or super tactical? So is this something that is going to impact millions of dollars in terms of business impact, or is it something that just impacts or like impressions or something. So it's like cents or dollars or whatever on an individual campaign. And then we look at how timely is that KPI. So is it something that we really can use to drive the business in real time, and you can make decisions on a campaign, let's say, or is it something that's best done on a 6-month basis? So to understand this, I always think about it kind of in a non-marketing context, and then I'll explain it in a marketing context. So if you and your doctor met and you needed to lose 20 pounds, and that was like your promise to your doctor and your promise to yourself, like you might have that like 20-pound goal, but you know that measuring your weight on a daily basis is okay, but maybe not that indicative, because maybe you had a really like salt-driven meal and you're holding a lot of water. Does that mean you're unhealthy? I don't know. And so you have all these other health diagnostics like, okay, I've got a Fitbit that tells me my heart rate in real time. Is that a really good long-term metric? Probably not. And so what we do to make sense of these things by plotting it out, you can start doing things like saying, okay, so my heart rate is not necessarily a good indicator of my long-term health, but on a run, if I can look at my heart rate and say, ooh, I'm getting that to like 140, 150, I'm in that cardio zone, that was a good run. That's the same as having a metric that tells me that was a good piece of creative or that was a good campaign. It doesn't mean that I judge the entire health of the business on it, but you start to understand the toolkit and when to use these metrics and how they might relate to each other. So, for example, on Think with Google, where we're doing a lot of CRM marketing, we're trying to find those long-term holy grail metrics where it's like, okay, I want to be able to tell our salespeople and our engineers, here's how much money Google makes on ad dollars for the average person that's subscribed to Think versus an advertiser that isn't subscribed to Think. I don't know that. That's meta-analysis that still needs to be done. But we can think about the relationship between that long-term metric to kind of the short-term activity. You visualize, well, what would the user be doing? Well, they'd probably be a monthly active user, and they'd be sharing a lot, and then they would be staying more on the site. And you start mapping that engagement, and you can see that on a daily basis, we're going to start thinking about those engaged, unique paid views. On a monthly basis, when we send our newsletter, we're going to be thinking about those sharing metrics and engagement metrics and so on. And then, so what's cool about it is that, like, so if you take this chart and then look at it in another dimension, you can say, okay, here's our division of labor. This is what we tell the machines to do, and we try to create reports around that. Our managers are looking at the health of the business across these dynamics. Directors should be up here, and if our CMO is asking us about our daily visits in real time, that CMO needs to find a different job. They should be thinking about what is lifetime value and having some of those critical conversations with the agency. The other way you can look at it is saying, okay, this is where I'm going to use machine learning, and I'm going to get the tools to do a lot for us. This is where I'm going to really rely on our agency partners and their reporting and their tools. This is where we're going to have our product marketers do analysis. And then this is the part where, like the MMMs or something, where you're doing that 6-month, 12-month meta-analysis that requires multiple teams, multiple data sets. That's the stuff that we do on kind of a different dynamic. And so we haven't perfected measurement in any way, shape, or form. But again, we're trying to figure out, like I want people on our team to be very, very fluid in their use of data and kind of know a few of those data points or KPIs that really matter in the context of, okay, my business strategy on Think is all about engagement versus acquisition. And therefore, my engagement metrics all along the funnel in real time, on weekly, on monthly, and 6-month basis are these things. And not that I don't care about the other ones, they're just like you might have a metric that, oh, that's like our monthly active users is really off, that engagement metric is no good. Let's play in that cluster to figure out all the other metrics around that to see if there's a problem. The same way that if you woke up one morning and you did your blood pressure test or something like that, and your blood pressure was really high, you don't take that as a sign that oh God, I'm unhealthy, that's definitive, we're done. You look at that as, that's a first signal to then go, okay, now I'm gonna open my toolkit and look at the other things. How's my heart rate doing? I'm gonna go see my doctor and they're gonna do a test and so on. And we might find the cause of that is elsewhere.
So first off, when you had the example of if I needed to lose 20 pounds, you should all join WW if that's the case.
This is why I used that example.
In all seriousness though, This has been a really great discussion. I personally have learned a lot, so thank you for answering my questions and being so honest and helpful with your answers. I wanted to do a quick summary of what I have learned. So what I learned was when it comes to deciding where to invest your dollars, you always fund the sure things with the highest ROI first. And you resist the urge to be, we want to be first because you're going with what's proven.
Yeah, work with the most signals that you have, and then sort of like, you think about it like a bullseye is the other way to think about it is like, so we start with the center of the bullseye for us is usually people putting their hand up in search or something else and saying like, I want to buy a Pixel phone now. And then outside of that, you might have similar audiences and remarketing. And so we have a little bit less data on them, but we have a good proxy. And then we start thinking about advanced audiences and other tools and so on. And then eventually, if you still have money, you start going to like, cool, I'm going to fund TV now. But even within TV, like we know that some of the audience segments that we're going after are much more predisposed to watching live sports, are much more predisposed to watching specialty TV or something like that, let's say. And so even within that like ring that's like TV is the outer ring for us, no, it's like there's the first little ring, which is are those types of programs, and then you get to TV, and then you get to like out of home and other stuff, because that's where we have the least amount of data.
Right. And then on the creative side, clients and agencies need to hold themselves accountable to make sure they're optimizing. But if you want to personalize more, you can do that without tripling your budgets in production or tripling the size of your team.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm conscious of there's probably half of the agency folks in the room are like, yeah, it still ends up being a ton of work for us because you don't build products that are seamless and easy to use all the time. We hear you. We're trying to always make it a little bit easier. But I think that's a good way for augmenting it. I think where I want us to go is, again, where the automation allows us to have those conversations about what does lifetime value for us equal in this, and is CPA a poor metric or is it a good metric? Like I think like it's not too. Like, it really wasn't that long ago that we all thought that clicks were the way to measure success on the internet, and then like after that we realized that that's kind of silly. So let's measure like conversions, and so let's just imagine for a second that we might look back in 5 years and go, wow, it was really silly to build all of our marketing approaches based on like CPA. Like we've been arguing a lot internally about this, where we look at different countries and say, here's the cost of acquiring a hardware customer, let's say, in this market versus that market versus this market. But when you actually do the segmentations, that's where the real information comes out. Because like if we were there's some industries like gaming, for example, where if like I don't know how many people are in the room, but like if I was a gaming, like an app developer, there's probably one person in this room that would generate 95% of my revenue. So do I really care about my CPA on average? No, because none of you matter to me except that one person that generates all of my revenue. So I want to find out everything about that segment, and I want to build creative that works for that person, and I want to upsell them and cross-sell to that person. And so when we go back to like deciding which country and which CPA, like the argument that I always try to make is, okay, cool, like it might cost X to acquire someone in Canada, but that Canadian user also, we know, much more likely to subscribe to subscription services because of the nature of our market. They're much more likely to then renew on this cycle, and they have this affinity towards Google. And so the 3 or 4 year value of a Canadian user relative to like a French user or something like that, you might generate 2 times the profit, but on the surface you might start with a metric like CPA. And this is the danger of having only one view of the world through one KPI, is that you might have a media buyer externally at our agency or someone in our media team who goes like, well, sorry, the CPA in Canada is $50 higher than Australia, so you guys are only getting this amount of money. And so you're throwing the business objectives kind of out the window if you look at it that. So I think the automation allows you to be much more efficient and effective on creative. Because what we didn't talk about today is that like every test we've done internally says that creative is still the thing that drives effectiveness. And it's sort of like, we even did it today, where we talk all about media buying, and then we forget, okay, well, 60 to 70% of the effectiveness is still driven by what you say and how you say it. So it does allow us, that automation helps to find that kind of effectiveness piece, but then it also hopefully saves time for us to have conversations around customer business objectives or sort of that long-term value.
Great. And then another thing I heard today was if you're a little jumbled on short-term versus long-term and what's a strategy versus what's a tactic, the impact matrix can help provide some clarity to your planning.
Yeah, and it will provide a lot of confusion at the beginning too. Like building that is the best exercise that you could do, is building it for yourself and having the tough conversations. And where's John in the room? John Dale. I know you're there. There you go. So John and I, every meeting we talk about measurement on his business is a fun meeting, let's call it, because we don't agree fundamentally on how these metrics work. And so you have to come to that sort of shared philosophy and view of the world. So our impact matrix is useless to give out to everybody. I think the framework is really good, but the actual way that we plot things out are really particular to the way that we think about the world and where our products are and what the business challenges are and who the segments are that we're trying to go after and what our competition is. But if you can use that, you become much more fluid and understand, is this a health concern that I measure my heart rate, or is it a health concern that I want to, I don't know, like see if I can do 50 push-ups?
And then the other thing I heard was you'd rather do almost anything other than influencer marketing.
I personally, I would just like to see influencer move in one of two directions. Either let's get better at treating it like the way that we view the rest of our audience media buys. Because if you're just like trying to buy out 100 influencers and really just looking at it in terms of reach and frequency and so on, then I think you're better off just going to Facebook and Google and other platforms and just buying audience-driven media, because it's just going to be just as targeted and you're effectively having the same relationship. The other direction is treat it like you would, like a true PR relationship with like a specific publisher or a big name celebrity or whatever it might be, and actually go deep and do the thing that the word says, influence, and like really tap into like where influencer is really, really good is for things like, so if you have more of a niche product, let's say, like Google Wi-Fi is a good one where like, to be frank, we don't spend a lot of money on Google Wi-Fi. We don't build enough of them, but like, but if we did, that might be one for like the hardcore enthusiasts, that like there's a niche community of people who care about that kind of thing, and we might really need to tap into them. Again, thinking about like healthcare, like you can tell like I do a lot of health blogs and all that kind of stuff. But like there's this guy called Ben Greenfield, and he's this like weird biohacker, whatever. Like if I was selling some niche, weird product or new supplement or something like that, he's an influencer. I need his community because there's only like, you think about that adoption curve, they're at the cutting edge of that. That's a really great place to use influencer, and you're thinking about it like a PR campaign. Later on, like mass influencer stuff is just like, that's a contradiction in terms.
So thank you. Are there any last baby photos that you would like to share?
One last baby photo. Beat me to it. Thank you, Selena. So we don't know if any of what we've said is helpful to anyone. But we've been thinking a lot in terms of our kind of role and relationship with other marketers in Canada. And if we can open up our doors and show how we use our products or how we think about kind of other marketing tactics, we're trying to do that. We did it a little bit with a podcast earlier this year. We're trying to do this. So if you have feedback on like, hey, I really wish you guys would have talked about this, or this was actually not what I was looking for, or you'd like to see more of this type of content, just go here. There's a survey. Our team will check it out, and then we'll try to do more going forward. Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.